In this video we're going to learn how to build a shopping cart using Django-Unicorn, and we're going to allow users to add items dynamically to a cart, and we're going to let them remove items. And you can see that these items are updated, we can add different quantities of items, and the price is updating dynamically as well. And Django-Unicorn enables this through AJAX requests, and we don't need to write any of those. It handles all of that for us. It's a very nice, useful addition to the Django ecosystem, and we're going to see how to use it in this video. Now, there's starter code available on GitHub. The link is in the description for that. You can clone that if you want to follow along. So let's get started and go to VS Code. Now, the first step after you've cloned the project is to install the requirements. Install those into your environment, and then you can run the Python 𝗤𝗵𝗽𝗁𝗫 command, and that will add Django's default tables to the database. Once you've done that, you can run the server, and you should be able to see the default page that we have here. We have a login form that allows users to log in. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a super user, and we're going to log into this application. So if we go back to the command line, we run Python 𝗤𝗫𝗽 create super user. And I'm going to give this user a name of admin, and we'll give it a password of test. And then once we run this server again, we should be able to log in and see the page that we've got. So let's log in now. The username is admin, the password was test. And when we log in, we see we get a blank page. There's nothing there. This is going to be the page that hosts the cart and the products. So we're going to build that using Django-Unicorn a little bit later. But first of all, let's build the models in Django. So let's go back to models.py, and I'm going to start defining these models now. Now we're going to use Django's default user model in this tutorial, but we're also going to build two extra models. Firstly, we're going to build a product model, and that's going to host all of the products in our fake e-commerce store. And as well as that, we're going to build a cart item model, and that's going to link a user to a particular product, and that's going to enable users to add products to their cart, and then they can check those products out later on. So let's start with the product class, and that's going to be a model, so we'll inherit from Django's model, and there's only going to be two fields here. We're going to keep this simple. Firstly, the name of the product, that'll be a model.car field. We'll give it a max length of, let's say, 200 for that. And secondly, the price field, that's going to be a models.decimal field, and we're going to add a couple of arguments to that. So decimal places, because we're dealing with currency, we're going to specify 2 decimal places. And secondly, the max digits, we're going to make that 8. And one other argument to that, I'm going to import from the Django.core.validators module the min value validator, and that's because we want to make sure that the price is a positive number. So we're going to specify that it cannot be negative. So you can add a validators argument to this price field, and we specify the min value validator with the minimum value passed in as 0. And finally, we'll add a _string method, and that will just return the name of the product. So that's all for the product class. We also want to create a user item class, and that's going to tie the product with a particular user. So a user can add multiple products to their cart through this model. So let's create that now. The first field we're going to add is the product field, and that's going to be a models.foreign_key, and it'll be a foreign key to the product model that we defined above. And when we delete a product, we want to cascade that delete. So that links the user item with a product. We also need to link it with the Django user model. So we're going to copy this line of code here, and we'll paste that below, and we'll change the name of the field to user, and the model that it links to is going to be called user as well. That's the Django built-in user model. And we're going to add 2 other fields to this model. Firstly, a quantity field that will define how many of a particular item a user is adding to their cart. That's going to be a positive integer field with a default of 1. And the final field is going to be a date added field, which will be a date time field with auto now add set to true. So whenever a user item is created, by default the added will populate with the current time, and that's all we need except another _string method. And again, for that we're going to return the product's name. So we follow the foreign key to the product and we put the name there. Once we've done that, we can stop the server and we can run the make migrations command, and that's going to make the migrations for these 2 new models that we've created. And when we've got that, we can then run migrate to add these tables to the database. So now we have the models. We want to actually populate the products table here with some data. So what I'm going to do is paste some code into a management script that will be available on GitHub. By default, it's not implemented. I'm going to paste some code in here, and you can run this script to give yourself some products if you're following along with this video. So at the top of the script, let's import the product model we've just created, and we'll replace the handle, which is currently not implemented, with this code here. And it basically just creates some products. These are just food products with a particular price. And once we've created that, the script is called populate, so we can run python manage.py populate, and that's going to add those products to the database. So now that we've done that, we can get started building this application. So I'm going to run the server again, and we're going to go back to this blank page that we had before. Nothing on that at the moment. There's a view for this page, and we're going to populate that with all of the products. So let's go to views.py, and the view is called cart, and you can see it's protected with the login required decorator. So what we're going to do is import this new model at the top that we've created called product, and we're going to fetch all of the products within the view. So that's going to be product.objects.all, and once we've done that, we can add a key to our context called products, which will map to that query set. That will now be available in our template, which is called cart.html. So if we now render out products within this template, we should now see that we have a query set on the page, and you can see all of the 5 products added by that management script on the page. So that's working fine. Let's now structure this page a little bit better. We're going to have on the left hand side all of the products in the system, and on the right hand side is going to be the cart, and we're going to use Tailwind CSS to create this grid system. So let's go back to the template, and I'm going to paste some code in here. Now you can see we have a div here with a class of grid, and it's grid columns free. That means the grid is going to span 3 columns on the page, and there are 2 child divs here. One has a column span of 2, which contains our products, and the other one has by default a column span of 1, so it contains our cart. So we're going to see that 2/3 of the page is dedicated to the products because of that call span, and the other third is dedicated to the cart. So let's save that, and we can go back and see what that looks like now. If we refresh the page, you see this very basic template. We're going to build from this. So on the left hand side, we're going to iterate over all of the products that are in our context that have been added here in the view, and we're going to paste in some code here underneath this h2 tag. So let me paste this in, and we can walk over this just now. So basically for each product in our products, we're rendering out an h5 with the product's name, and we're also rendering the product's price as a paragraph tag and a button saying add to cart. Later on, we're going to use Django-Unicorn to add to the cart, but for now we can save this and we can see what this looks like with our styles. And you can see we have a very basic system here. It's got the products that we've got in our database, and it's got the prices beneath them, as well as that button. So let's now add Django-Unicorn to our project, and we'll create a component for this cart. Now Django-Unicorn should be installed if you ran the pip install command, because it's in the requirements.txt file here. But what we're going to do now is go to the documentation, which is here, and there's a documentation page for Django-Unicorn, and the installation section is what we're going to look at. Now we should have already installed it, so we don't need to run this command, but there are some setup steps here below to integrate Unicorn with Django. The first step is to add Django-Unicorn to installed apps. So let's copy that there, and we'll go to settings.py, and we're going to add this to the installed apps just below Django widget tweaks here. And once we've done that, let's go back to the documentation. Step 2 is to add this path to our project URL conf. So let's go and copy that, and we'll go to the project URLs, and we can paste that below here. And that is basically to enable Django-Unicorn to communicate from the client to our Django server. And this communication is quite transparent, but it's necessary to define these URLs so that Django-Unicorn knows what to do. And the next step, if we go back there, is to load the unicorn at the top of the Django template. So let's copy and paste that. And we're going to paste that into the base.html. So within the core templates, the base.html at the top here, we can load unicorn. And the next step is also in this template. We grab the unicorn scripts tag, and we can paste that within the head tag. So let's just paste it at the bottom of the head tag. And the final thing to do is to add the CSRF token to the body tag. So we'll paste that right at the top of the body tag. So now that the setup is complete, we're going to create a unicorn component. So I'm going to stop the server here, and we're going to create this component. So let's clear the terminal, and it's python manage.py, and the command that we're going to use is called start unicorn, and it takes 2 arguments. The first one is the app we want to put the component in, so that's going to be the core application, which is this one here, and the second argument is going to be the name of our component, so let's call it cart. And once that's completed, it will add a couple of things to our core application. So if we inspect that, we see there's now a components directory that contains a cart.py file. Let's look at that. It's a very simple class, and it inherits from the unicorn view. The other thing that command has added, under the templates directory, we now have a unicorn subdirectory, which contains the template for our component, a cart.html file, and that's where we put the component code for our template. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move this code here that we just defined, the div containing all of the products. we're going to cut that out of the original template and we're going to paste that into our component here. So let's just paste that at the top here and we can save this component. And once we've done that, we're going to go back to the template that we just removed all that code from, and at the top we're going to load the unicorn there. And then within the content of the page, we're going to load this new component, this unicorn component. And the syntax to do that can be found on the documentation under the components section. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see here we have this directive here. So we use the unicorn template tag that comes from Django-Unicorn, and then we reference the name of the component. In our case, that will be 𝗏, and then we can pass any keyword arguments to that component. So we're going to do that right now. So let's get back to the template. And what we're going to do is we're going to specify the unicorn template tag here. So unicorn, the name of the component is 𝗏, and finally we're going to pass some keyword arguments. Now our 𝗏 needs to know which user we're dealing with. So what we're going to do is pass a keyword argument called user in there, and it's going to be equal to the request.user, and we're going to pass the primary key of that user in. And the reason for that is we want to only pass the primary key because sometimes Django-Unicorn will serialize all fields on your user model, including sensitive information such as your password. We only need the primary key so we can do a lookup within the component. So we can just pass that in like this. And we're going to pass one more keyword argument, and that's going to be all of the products that come from our view's context. So the view is adding all of these products to the context, and they are available within our component template, as you can see here, for product and products. So we're passing that in and we're going to accept that within the component, but we need to write some code within the component class. So let's go to the component class now. Currently it's empty, so we're going to fill this out now, but first of all let's do some imports at the top. We're importing the user model from Django, and we're also importing the user item model, which links a user to a particular set of products. Now our component is going to have two fields. Firstly, the user products. This is going to be a list of user items, or a query set of user items. So what we're going to do here is we're going to specify query set type, which is imported from Django-Unicorn, and we can type hint the user products with the query set type, and we'll pass the user item to that. And we'll give it a default value of none, so when the cart is first loaded, there are no products within that cart. And the second field is going to be the user's primary key, which is just going to be an integer. So we will save that there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to override the init method for this component. This is a initialization method that's called whenever you create a class in Python, like a constructor. And as well as self, that also takes the args and kwargs arguments. So let's now define what happens within that initializer. Now the first thing you must do is call the super method to call the parent class, and that will perform some setup from the Django-Unicorn side. And as it says in the comment here, this is required in your init method. And once we've done that, we can set some of these variables with the values we want. Now the init method is where you can accept some of the keyword arguments that are passed into the component. As you can see, we've got two here, products and user. So let's start with the user. We're going to say self.user primary key is equal to kwargs.get, and we'll get the user that's passed into this component. As you can see, the keyword argument is user, and that is passed in, and you can get that from the kwargs that are passed to the init method. So we get the user primary key and we set this class variable here. And once we have the user's primary key, we can then set the user products with a query to the database. So self.user products will be equal to user item.objects.filter, and we'll filter down to only the user's products. So user equals self.user primary key. So what that's going to do is in our component template, we now have access to these variables on the class. The user products is the one that we're interested in. That defines what products a user has in their cart. So what we're going to do is go back to the page, and you can see on the right hand side we have this empty section for the cart. We're going to fill that out with these user products now, and we can do that because whatever you define on your Django-Unicorn component is then available within the component template. So let's go back to our component template, and in the section for the cart, which is at the bottom here, underneath this h2 class, we're going to paste some code here. And let me format this and then we'll explain this code. So firstly, we check if the user has any user products. In other words, does the user have any items in their cart? And this comes from this variable here, user products, which is set on line 13 here. So if this line here, user item.objects.filter, when we filter those down by the user's items, if that has any, then this if statement will evaluate to true, and then we'll list out all of the user's products in a for loop. Otherwise, we'll simply send a message to the user on the page that there are no products in the cart. So if we save that and make sure the server is running here, we can go back to the page and we can see what that is actually doing. So let's refresh the page and we now get the message there are no products in the cart. So what we will now want to do is give users the ability to add one of these products to the cart. So basically when this button is clicked, we want to add that item to our cart. And what we need to do is look at Django-Unicorn's actions for this. Now there's a section of the Unicorn documentation for actions, and there's an example here that's very close to what we're going to do. Now an action corresponds to an event, so for example a click event on a button, which is exactly what we need, and you can define that with the unicorn click attribute. And then this value here should be a function on your component, as you can see below here. This is calling a function called clearName, and the field name is then reset to an empty string. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a function that allows us to add a product to the cart. So let's go back to the template for the component, and it's going to be up here, this button with the message of add to cart. So let's add the unicorn click action to that button. So it's going to be unicorn click, and we'll set the value of add item. And we want to pass a parameter to this function, and that's going to be the product's primary key, so product.pk. And then when we call this function, we know which product's primary key to add to the user's cart. So with that, we now need to go to our unicorn component and we write a function called add item. So let's go back to this class here, and below the initializer, we will create another function called add item. And that's going to take self as a first argument, but it's also going to take the product's primary key, which is being passed in from the template. So before we write this, let's go back to the models.py file, and what we want to do here is this class here. We want to create an item, if it doesn't already exist, that links a particular product to the user. So for example, on the front end, if the user doesn't have pizza in their cart, it's now going to create that in the database. On the other hand, if the user does have pizza already in the cart, what we want to do is we want to increment the quantity. So if a user has 1 item, it will become 2. If they have 10, it will become 11, and so on. So what we need to do is figure out if a user item exists for a given product user combination. If it does exist, we increment the quantity. Otherwise, we create the item in the database. So what we are going to use here is the get or create function to do that. And the command is going to be user item.objects.get or create. And we want to fetch or create this model if the user ID is equal to self.user primary key, and if the product ID is equal to the product primary key, which is being passed into this from the template, as you can see here. So we're going to fetch that item and we're going to figure out whether or not it's been created. So the get or create method, it returns a tuple. The first item is the Django model, that's the Python class. And the second is a boolean that indicates whether or not the item was created. So if the item has been created, it's going to have a default value of 1, which comes from the model keyword argument for the quantity field. But if the model has not been created, in other words, if get or create has just retrieved something from the database, we're going to increment that quantity. So what we're going to do is, if it's not been created, we're going to increment the quantity. So we have the item, we can set the item's quantity equal to an f expression, and we're going to get the existing quantity and we'll add 1 to that. Now to do this, we need to add the f statement to our imports. So from django.db.models, import f, and that allows us to write these f expressions, which you can find out more about in the documentation here. And the reason we might want to use these f expressions is that they make it possible to manipulate and change values in your database without pulling quantities out into your Python code. So this is going to update the quantity field without actually pulling the existing quantity into memory. It's just going to increment it using SQL. And when we've done that, we can call the save method. Now once we've saved that to the database and we've incremented the quantity, we're going to refetch all of the user products. So that is going to be the same line as we had up in the initializer. It just pulls out all of the user's items from the database, including this new item if it's been created, or the changed item with the quantity incremented. So the important point here is we're manipulating with this add item function, and then we reset the class variable of user products, which is available here and available in the template. So now in the component template, when we iterate over the user products at the bottom here, we are now going to have an additional product if one was created, or we're going to have a new quantity for an existing product. So let's save all of that, and we should hopefully be able to see this in action. Go back to the shopping cart page, and if we now click add to cart, you see that that has become available in the cart. and similarly if we add another one it becomes available. Now we want to style this properly, so that's the next step. So to do that, let's go back to the template, and it's this code here within the if statement. If there are user products, we want to show them in a different way, so we're using 𝗬𝗏 to style this up. And if we look at how that works, we see now we have on the right hand side a slightly better representation where we have the quantity and the name of the product along with the price of that product. Now this isn't quite accurate. You can see we have two of this particular product, quinoa. However, the price is actually just equal to the price of one of those products. So we need to fix that, and that's what we're going to do now. Let's go to our model class, and what we're going to do is define a property on this user item model. And you can do this with a decorator in Python, so it's the property decorator. And then we write a function and we'll call it total price, and that just takes self as an argument. So the total price, we're going to return self.quantity, and we're going to multiply that by self.product.price. So let's save that, and the reason that this is going to work is we have a quantity which is 1, 2, 3 or so on, and the product price is coming from the product model, so it's linked by the foreign key, and that's a decimal field. So we multiply that by the quantity, and that should give us an accurate reading for the total price based on the quantity. So we're now going to reference that in our component template. So that's the line here that we're going to replace. The product's price, we're going to instead use the total price from the user item model that we've just defined. And because it's a property, we don't need to call it as a function, even though it is actually a function on the model. But this property decorator makes it seem like a property. So if we now save that and go back to our template, the quinoa field here is now the right price. We have 2 multiplied by the actual price because there's 2 products in this cart. So what we'd now like to do is add a message here displaying the total value of items in the cart. So let's go back to our template, and underneath this for loop that loops over all of the user's products, we want to add another div here that contains a message with the total. Currently this is hard coded. We're going to change that in a minute. Let's see how this would look on our template. And we have a divider here and then the total listed underneath. So what we're going to do is add a total field to our component here. And it's going to be here, so total, and it's going to be a float. And by default, that will be 0. Now what we can do is at the bottom here, I'm going to add a function to this component, and it's going to be called getTotal. And this is going to calculate the total based on the user products that are in the cart. So let's define this here. It's simply going to set the total value that we've just added to the component there on line 10. And we're going to use the sum function in Python, and we're going to sum up the product.total price, which remember is the property that we've added here. It's a property that calculates based on the quantity, the total price. We're going to calculate that for each product in self.userProducts. So the component knows all of the products that are in a user's cart, and it's going to use this sum function and call the total price for each one of them, and then that will calculate the total. We can then add that to the template, so we can replace the hard-coded field here with the actual value by referencing the total. And because this is a field on our component, it's now available in the component template. So we can reference it normally as with any other Django context variable. And if we save that and go back to our page, you see that its current value is 0, which is the default value it had within the component on line 10. What we need to do is actually call this getTotal function, and we call it when the initializer is done. So after we've added the user products, we can call self.getTotal. And we also want to call that when an item is added to the cart as well. So at the bottom of that function, we'll also call getTotal. Now it would be nice if you could call this getTotal whenever the user products change. I'm not sure if Django-Unicorn offers that feature of reactivity, but if it does, let me know in the comments. But for now that will work, and if we refresh the page, we see that the total is calculated, and when we add an item to the cart, for example pizza, that recalculates the total and adds it to this list, and it's all handled dynamically on the component with these fields, and it uses AJAX requests, which we don't need to worry about writing. Django-Unicorn is smart enough to know how to update fields and how to render the values on the front end based on the component and its template. So the final step in this video, I want to add a button that allows users to remove items from the cart. So let's get back to the template, and we're going to add this where the product's price is. I'm going to replace that with some HTML. So we still have the total price, but we now have a very archaic button that has an X. So if we save this and go back to the template, we now see this doesn't look particularly good, but it's going to have to do. And what we want to do is when we click this button, we want to delete that product from our cart. So we're going to add another unicorn click directive. So let's add it to this button. It's unicorn click, and we're going to reference a delete item function, and we'll pass again the product's primary key that we are iterating over, so that it knows the correct product to remove. So let's now add a delete item function to our cart. So we'll do this underneath the add item. So it's going to be delete item, and that will take again the product primary key. So what we need to do is fetch the item. So it's going to be item equals user item.objects.filter, and we're going to pass the primary key equal to that product primary key. And because we're deleting from the database, we can simply call item.delete when we fetch that product, and then we can remove that from our query list of user products. So it's self.userProducts, and that's going to be equal to self.products.exclude, and we'll exclude the item with that primary key, and that will remove that item from our query set. And the final step is to call the self.getTotal method, which will recalculate the total after you delete that product. So let's save that, and we can go back to the template. If we refresh the page, we can still add items to our cart, as you can see here. If we remove quinoa from the cart, you can see that it successfully removes that from the cart and it recalculates the total, and that works perfectly fine. So this is nice and interactive. It's using Django-Unicorn to define this component, and it allows you to add and remove items, and it recalculates quantities and totals and updates the page with no refreshing. It's quite similar to something you would get with React, or even better with htmx. And if we take one last look at the models.py file, because this user item, it links a particular user to a particular product. This is product specific, so if we were to log out of this application, and if we were then to log in with another user, and I've created another user now, you can see that that user has no products in their cart. We can now add those products, and that will work fine. And if we log out and log in with our original user, we can see that their cart is preserved, the items are preserved, and it's reloaded when they log in. So this works per user. Each user in your application can add whatever products they want to their cart. Other users can have other carts, and that works fine. So that's all for this video. In this video, we've learned how to build a cart using Django-Unicorn. We've learned how to work with components and define attributes that then can be updated by fields and methods on your component. So thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.